during this time that I did read one book about Islam in the public library, because I had never heard of Islam ever. But I remember I was looking in the religious section in the library at school, and there was a book about Islam, and or it was in the library, the public library, and I remember it was some title like "Why I'm Not a Muslim" or some, one of these titles that was propagandistic against Islam, but I had no idea. So I just took the book and I read it, and I remember it said that Muslims, M-O-S-L-E-M-S, and any of you knowing Arabic knows that's a very derogatory word. A Muslim is someone who oppresses someone else. That's a very quick sleight of the pen that was used in the past for a very real purpose. It said that Muslims were people who worshipped a moon god named Allah, who lived in a box in the desert in Saudi Arabia, and they were oppressive to women. I remember there was a whole chapter about how they could have 4 wives and as many as they want, actually, because they could marry 2, divorce 1, get 3 more, this whole, and it said that, I remember the one thing that really caught my attention was the whole chapter on jihad, where it said that Muslims were allowed to kill non-Muslims at any time, at any place, without discretion, and it was an honorable act, and not only would they go to heaven before it, but they would get 70 virgins on the way. So I closed the book on Islam, put it back on the shelf, and marked off Islam off my little list of religions, and said thanks but no thanks, and if I ever see a Muslim, I am out. And I said I'm pretty safe in Greenville, South Carolina. I had never seen a Muslim ever. So I said, I don't have to worry about running into no Muslims, thank God. So, I started, just worshiping, I tried to just be a good person, pray to God, ask Him for guidance, try to be a genuinely good person. And I remember what changed is when I met a Muslim. I met a Muslim who I had met a couple of times at school. We had went to school together, and I knew him, but I never knew that he was Muslim. And there's a couple of reasons why I never known he was Muslim. Because he was African American, number one, and the book said that Muslims were Arabs. And number 2, I didn't know, I thought Muslims ran around, marrying as many women as they want and killing non-Muslims. I didn't know that they could also be part-time drug dealers. So I didn't know, I never knew that this guy was Muslim. I didn't put 2 and 2 together. So we were at his house one day, and me and my other friend, the one that I got into a lot of trouble with, I'm trying to keep him out of trouble now. We were at his house, and we were debating something about religion. I forget what even the topic was, but you had 2 teenagers thinking they know everything. And I was trying to explain something to him about the Bible. And that guy came in and was listening. He said, "Have you ever heard of Islam?" I said, "Yes, I've heard all about Islam." He was like, "Okay, so what do you think of it?" I said, "What do you mean what I think of it? That's probably the worst religion I've ever seen on the face of the planet." He's like, "Why?" And he's like, "But I'm a Muslim." I was like, "Man, stop playing." You're an African American. He's like, "So?" I'm like, "The book said you guys were Arab. All the Muslims were Arabs." He was like, "What else did you read in the book?" And I told him. He was like, "Man, what in the, what have you been reading?" He's like, "You need to go to the mosque for Jummah." He's like, he told me, he said, "I'm not a good Muslim." This is what he said to me. He said, "I'm not a good Muslim. I'm not even going to try to front and say I'm a good Muslim." He said, "But I can guide you to some people that can tell you the real truth about Islam," because he knew about my story about wanting to find religion. And he said, "You need to go to the mosque for Jummah." And I said, What's Jummah?" He said, "It's just like church with no chairs." And I said, "I can do church with no chairs because in church the chairs were the worst part anyway. Because they have these hard benches that you sit on that are like this, and they're so hard." I said, "That's good. You sit on carpet? Wow, man, every church should be like that." And I said, "Where's the mosque?" He said, "It's on Wade-Hampton Boulevard." I said, "Where on Wade-Hampton Boulevard?" I lived on Wade-Hampton Boulevard. I lived right off of Wade-Hampton Boulevard. He said, "You know where Lee Road intersects with Wade-Hampton?" I said, yeah, I live on the other side of that intersection. He said, "It's right there." I said, "No, it's not. There's nothing. There's a gas station or a church." He said, "Yeah, you know that church, the Evangelical Missionary Training Facility?" I said, "Yeah, I used to take missionary classes there." He said, "You know that building in the parking lot with the gold thing on top?" I said, the gym?" He was like, "No, that's the mosque." because I had always thought it was the gym because it was in the same parking lot and it was just rectangular with 2 glass doors in the front. And you could literally walk in between the church and the masjid and touch them like this. Anyone doesn't believe me, go to Greenville, South Carolina, look at the masjid. You can almost touch both of them just like this. He said, yeah, it's right there. I said, I've never, at first I was shocked. Like, I've been living across the street from all these crazy Muslims all my life. I said, I never knew. And he told me to go to Jummah, and I asked him what time. He said he would meet me there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. So I said, okay. I went on Friday. And I'm waiting outside for him. I'm not going inside. That's not happening. And I'm seeing all these people going in. And at this time, it was a predominantly Indo-Paki Arab masjid. Anyone who went in was not American, period. And I did not see even one African American going there. And I did see one. And then when he went in, I heard him talking in a dialect that I realized he was probably from Africa. So I said, he's not American. So I'm not going. I'm waiting, and I'm standing outside, sitting on the church steps, and the imam pulls up and parks right in front of me, who I had no idea he was the imam. But he got out and he asked me, am I waiting for someone, this, that, and the other? And I explained to him. He said, oh yeah, we know this brother. You don't see him that much, but we know who he is. He said, I'm glad you came. He was a very, very nice, gentle young man. And he invited me into the mosque, and I kind of wanted to wait on my friend. But I didn't want, at the same time, I didn't want to tell this man I don't want to go in. So I went in, and they put me in the back and gave me a chair anyway. And I said, I came to sit on the floor. And they gave me a chair anyway, and all of these people are piled up in front of me. And there's no Americans here. And I'm starting to wonder, if this is a setup, because it's starting to smell like a setup to me. Because in my mind, I'm like, you've been set up before, and this seems kind of like this. So, and I'm starting to think in my head, scenarios, a young mind at play. I said, this other guy, my friend, he probably was in the same situation like me, and he probably made a deal with them to get out as long as he brought other Americans and tricked them into coming to the mosque so they could do their jihad after Jummah and get their 70 virgins. So I'm sitting here, and there's all these people in front of me, and then there's a curtain with all these people behind me making noise, and I have no idea who's back here. So I'm stuck in the middle of this. I hear that it's some women, but I don't, there's a curtain. I have no idea. So I'm like, there's something very odd about what's going on right here. I'm like, just let me make it. I'm starting to look for the exit. I'm like, calculating how many people are between me and the exit. I know some martial arts, so I said I might hit a couple of them, and I'm out. And then the imam came, and I just now realized that he was the imam because he got up on the minbar, and they started to call the adhan. And, I said, okay, that man seemed nice. He seemed genuinely nice. So I felt a little more comfort. And then he got up after the adhan, and he started his khutbah. Inna alhamdulillah nahmaruhu wa I said, oh my God. I said, I bet you he's talking about me. And he's being forceful. He was getting loud and banging on the minbar, and he's pointing in my direction. I'm like, oh man, I gotta get out of here really quick, I said, well, I'm going to take my chance with the women behind me. I'm going through the curtain. I know him. So the imam started to pray, and when he recited the Quran, I know it sounded very intriguing. I had no idea what it was. But then when I saw Muslims bow and prostrate on the floor, verses and verses of every religious book that I had ever read started ringing off in my head that this was the way men of God prayed. And the first thing that I could think of in my mind was, this is worship. That's what I said to myself. This is not prayer, because prayers are asking God for something. These people are worshiping God. So I said to myself that you've written this religion off way too easily. I thought I was a much more open-minded person than that, and I was ashamed of myself that I had written it off with just one little book. I had put all these studies into the other religions. I read this one thing about Islam and was done. So I went to the imam after Jummah. He talked to me, and I would have to say that I was probably a little bit rude with him. And I've asked him to forgive me. I saw him a few years later. I said, you got to forgive me for the first time you saw me. Because he started telling me, would you like to know a little bit more about... He had a very heavy accent. He was an Egyptian brother. Would you like to know a little bit more about Islam? He tried to give me some pamphlets. I said, no. I don't want any of this right here. I said, do you have a book? This is what I wanted to know. Do you have a book? Can you give me... He said, yes, we have a book. I said, it's called the Quran. I said, can I read it? Is it in English? Can I read it? He said, sure, you can read it. And then he tried to explain it to me a little bit how it came by. I said, nah, Just give me the book, because the book should speak for itself. So I took the Quran home, and on Friday night I started to read it, because this is a book I had never seen before. And I was very interested. So I went home and I opened the Quran, and I read the Fatiha. It seemed to me kind of like the Lord's Prayer. It was a little similar to what I found in the Bible. But then I started to read Surah Al-Baqarah. I started to read Surah Al-Imran. And I started to see names that I had seen before. I started to see names like Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Yahya, John the Baptist, Zechariah, Mary. And I said, I know all of these names, but there was something different about these people in this book. The prophets that I found in the Bible were people that were deplorable, of not very good character. These same men in the Quran were someone who were at the highest echelon of moral character and moral fiber. They were someone that was an example to be followed because they lived the message that they preached. Therefore, they were able to be followed and emulated. So, I read all of these chapters, and I read the story of Jesus, peace be upon him. Because when I saw the name Jesus first, that really intrigued me. I wanted to see, what does this book have to say about Jesus? And I read the story in Ali Imran, and I read the story in Surah Al-Maryam. And it was more beautiful than anything I had ever read in the New Testament, or any nativity story that I had ever heard. It was more beautiful than that, times 10. I remember the only thing that I could capture in my mind was the miracle of how, because in the Bible you never really figure out the conflict of how Mary gets over this finger pointing at her about her coming with a baby and she's not married. There's no real end to that. There's no real defense for her from this in the New Testament. But the Quran is so explicit and so clear that Jesus' first miracle was to speak from the womb, to speak as a baby and defend the honor of his mother. Something that you cannot deny. Something that you cannot deny about her, who Mary was, when you have this baby speaking on her behalf. So, I would say I read the Quran entirely in 3 days. But that first night, after I had made it through Surah Al-Imran, my heart was already given to this book. I didn't know what it meant to be a Muslim. I didn't know how to be a Muslim. I didn't even know what that meant. But I knew that whoever it was that followed this book, I wanted to be like these people. I wanted to be like the people that I read about in this book. These were people I could follow. These were prophets. This was a book of guidance. And this was something that the book is calling and appealing to me. That if you don't believe in this book, you never see that. I've never seen this in any other scripture. The direct challenges that are in the Quran, that if you don't believe this book is true, put it to the test. Put it to the test. And this was something that was so astounding to me, that God is telling you over and over again, if you don't believe this is the truth, test it. Bring me something else like it. Test it. Put it to test. If it was written, if there was more than, all of the analogies about God, everything was so logical, so rational, so reasonable in my mind, that it was like 2 + 2 = 4, and that was it. There was no 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, egg, yolk, water, fire. There was none of that foolishness. The Quran was very direct and very straightforward in its teachings. So I gave my heart to Islam that night in my living room, reading the Quran. And I cried and cried, that I had been looking for the truth all this time, had searched all this way, and it was right across the street. Right across the street from my